Every morning starts the same for me, the smell of fresh coffee, the quiet hum of sprinklers, and the calm rhythm of birds in the trees. I like to think of my yard as my little slice of peace. It's not fancy, but it's mine. The grass is soft, the hedges are trimmed just right, and the small fountain in the corner adds a gentle sparkle when the sun hits it. I built this space to feel calm, something reliable in a world that often is. That peace lasted exactly 8 minutes this morning. I was sitting on the porch, half listening to a podcast, when movement caught my eye. Across the street, the HOA president, Karen, was doing her usual morning rounds, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like she was inspecting a five-star resort instead of a suburban street. I almost smiled. Karen's energy was something else. She was the kind of person who treated neighborhood rules like sacred text. But then she did it again. Without hesitation, she stepped off the sidewalk and cut straight across my lawn. Not a corner shortcut, not a small step, a full diagonal march across the middle, heels clicking against the stepping stones I'd carefully placed. The sprinklers hadn't turned on yet, but I could almost hear the grass sigh in protest. I took a slow sip of coffee and tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just once. Maybe she didn't realize. But no, she'd done this before, twice last week. And each time I'd stood there debating whether to say something. It felt petty to complain about a few steps on the grass. Still, it was my property. And she wasn't exactly unaware Karen noticed everything. So when she reached the edge of the yard, I finally spoke. "Morning, Karen," I called out, keeping my tone light. "Would you mind using the sidewalk next time? I just reseeded that patch there." She stopped, turned, and smiled, the kind of smile people use when they're not really listening. "Oh, don't worry," she said cheerfully. "Just making my way to the next house. You know how it is." "Right," I said, still smiling. "But if you could just go around next time." "Oh, I'm not hurting anything," she interrupted with a wave of her hand. "It's just grass. Besides, it's quicker this way." And just like that, she turned and kept walking, clipboard tucked under her arm, cutting straight through my yard again on her way back. I sat there, coffee in hand, speechless. It wasn't anger exactly, more like disbelief. She wasn't being rude on purpose. She genuinely thought it didn't matter. That made it worse somehow. I looked at the faint line of footprints she'd left behind and felt a tiny flicker of determination spark in my chest. I could let it go. I could ignore it, as most people would. But something about the way she brushed me off stuck. It wasn't about grass anymore, it was about respect. If Karen could stroll through one yard, she'd stroll through them all. That night, I replayed the scene in my mind while watering the plants. The sprinklers hissed softly, spraying light arcs of water across the lawn. I adjusted the nozzle and chuckled to myself. Maybe there was a way to handle this without confrontation. Something clever, something that said, "Please stay off," without actually saying it. I didn't want an argument, just a reminder. As I stood there with the garden hose, I imagined her face if the sprinklers suddenly turned on mid-step. The thought made me laugh, which was probably the first time I'd ever laughed about an HOA issue. Still, I didn't want to be mean. Karen wasn't a bad person, just overly confident. So maybe the right approach wasn't revenge, but a gentle surprise. When I went back inside, I opened my laptop and started browsing. Motion lights, lawn decorations, tiny picket fences, nothing felt quite right. Then, halfway through a gardening forum, I saw it, motion sensor sprinklers. Designed to keep deer and raccoons away, but perfect for someone who tends to wander where they shouldn't. I leaned back, smiling. Now that, I said to myself, might just work. It wasn't about soaking anyone or causing trouble. It was about boundaries, literally. And if a gentle mist of water could help remind people to stay on the path, who could argue with that? I shut my laptop, already planning the layout in my mind. Tomorrow, I'd make a few changes, nothing obvious, nothing drastic, just enough to let my lawn protect itself. As I turned off the porch light that night, I couldn't help but grin. The thought of Karen marching confidently across my yard again, only to get an unexpected sprinkle, was too good to ignore. For the first time in weeks, I looked forward to morning. The next morning started peacefully enough, the sound of the mail truck pulling away, the smell of toast drifting through the kitchen, and the comforting sight of my lawn sparkling in the early light. I had almost forgotten about Karen's little shortcut adventure the day before. Almost. When I stepped outside to grab the mail, I noticed an envelope sitting right on top of the stack. The HOA logo was printed neatly in the corner, bold and official. My first thought was that it might be the usual newsletter or reminder about next month's meeting. But when I tore it open, the words made me pause. "Friendly reminder," it began, "to maintain consistent standards of lawn care and property appearance." It wasn't exactly unfriendly, but I couldn't miss the tone. There it was again, that subtle Karen touch. No specific complaint, no mention of what I supposedly did wrong, just a tidy little note that said, "I'm watching." I laughed under my breath. My lawn looked great. The hedges were trimmed, the edges were perfect, and the grass was greener than most of the neighborhood. If this was her way of sending a message, it was a strange one. Still, I pinned the letter to the fridge as a reminder, not of what she said, but of what I planned to do. Later that evening, I decided to attend the HOA meeting just to see if there'd be more of the same. The community hall was the usual mix of polite chatter and folding chairs. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, wearing that same confident smile she always had. "Before we begin," she said, "I just want to remind everyone about keeping our properties consistent and well kept. It's what keeps our neighborhood beautiful." Her eyes scanned the room, and of course, landed right on me. I smiled back, nodding slightly, pretending not to notice. She continued talking about trash bins, seasonal decorations, and lawn edging. I sat quietly, half listening, half thinking about how ironic it was that someone who walked across my grass was now talking about property care. When the meeting ended, I walked up to her just to say hello. She greeted me warmly, as if yesterday's lawn crossing never happened. "Oh, hi," she said. "Everything all right with your yard?" "All good," I said casually. "Got your reminder, appreciate the note." Her smile didn't waver. "Just doing my part," she replied. "We all have to set examples, don't we?" "Absolutely," I said with a smile that matched hers perfectly. "That's why I've been thinking of adding a little something new to my setup, maybe a modern touch, you'll see." She nodded, likely assuming I meant new plants or lighting. "I'm sure it'll look wonderful," she said. I thanked her, turned, and walked home, all while picturing her face when she saw what I had in mind. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a notepad, and a small burst of determination. I searched for motion sensor sprinklers again, this time comparing brands and reviews. Some looked complicated, others bulky, but a few were perfect, discreet, efficient, and quick to install. I ordered them on the spot. Estimated delivery 2 days. While I waited, I couldn't help but think about how this small situation had turned into something strangely entertaining. I wasn't angry anymore. In fact, I was kind of enjoying it. It wasn't about getting back at Karen. It was about quietly proving a point. The next morning, as I watered the plants manually, I noticed a few faint footprints still pressed into the grass from her last shortcut. The soil had flattened slightly where she'd walked. It wasn't a big deal, but it was enough to remind me that my plan wasn't overthinking. It was necessary. I decided to tidy the lawn even more, just to make sure everything looked perfect before setting up my new gear. The edges, the flower beds, even the stepping stones, I lined them all carefully. If Karen came by again before the sprinklers arrived, I wanted her to notice how pristine it was. Maybe she'd think twice before walking through. That afternoon, a neighbor named Daniel stopped by while walking his dog. "Hey," he said, "your yard looks amazing lately. What's your secret?" "Consistency," I said with a grin, "and a little patience." He laughed and nodded. "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working." I thanked him and waved goodbye, feeling oddly proud. Maybe my lawn was about to make a statement, not just about grass, but about respect. When I went back inside that evening, I noticed the HOA letter still hanging on the fridge. I reread it and smiled. "Maintain consistent standards," it said. "Oh, I plan to," I murmured to myself. 2 days later, I heard the doorbell ring and saw a small box waiting on the porch. My new sprinklers had arrived. The packaging even said, "Protect your garden with smart motion technology." Perfect. As I opened the box and laid the pieces out across the table, I could already picture where each one would go near the stepping stones, beside the flower bed, and just along that familiar diagonal path. Tomorrow morning, Karen would probably be out again doing her usual rounds. And when she did, she'd find that my modern touch had arrived. I poured myself another cup of coffee, smiled, and thought, let's see who's setting the example now. The box sat on my porch like a small package of possibilities. Inside, it was my new peacekeeping tool, the motion sensor sprinkler system I'd ordered. It wasn't much to look at. A set of slim black nozzles, a few connectors, and a control unit that promised smart garden protection. The kind of product meant for curious animals, but in my case, it would work just fine for a different kind of curiosity, the human kind. I brought everything inside, spread the parts out across the kitchen table, and smiled. It was almost funny how excited I was over sprinklers. But this wasn't about water or gadgets. It was about creating a quiet, clever reminder that my space was mine. After reading the instruction sheet twice, mostly because the diagrams looked like tiny alien blueprints, I grabbed my gloves, a small shovel, and headed out to the lawn. The morning sun was soft, the air smelled like freshly cut grass, and it felt like a perfect day to set things right. I started by packing the same path Karen usually took. I'd seen her walk it enough times to trace it from memory, a neat diagonal line starting near the sidewalk, cutting straight across the lawn and ending near the corner flower bed. I stood there for a moment, imagining her confident stride, clipboard in hand, talking to herself about neighborhood improvement. Then I grinned. The plan was simple. Place 3 motion sprinklers in a triangle formation. The sensors would detect movement, and a light spray of water would gently remind anyone who stepped off the sidewalk to take a different route. It wasn't aggressive or mean, just a smart, harmless solution. As I worked, my neighbor, Mrs., peeked over the hedge. "Morning," she called cheerfully. "New project." "Just updating my watering system," I said, trying to keep my grin subtle. "Well, it looks fancy," she said. "You always have the nicest lawn on the street." I thanked her and got back to work, pretending this was just another bit of home maintenance. After all, the last thing I needed was for the story to spread before it was ready for its grand debut. By noon, everything was installed perfectly. The sprinklers were almost invisible, the sensors tucked neatly between small garden stones, and the thin hoses hidden beneath the soil. I even tested each one to make sure the timing was right. The moment I stepped near the flower bed, a quick burst of water sprayed up like a tiny fountain. It made me jump and laugh out loud. "Perfect," I said to myself, wiping water from my arm. Exactly the right amount of surprise. Next, I adjusted the timer so they wouldn't interfere with my normal morning watering. They'd only activate when someone actually stepped on the lawn. I stood there for a few minutes, watching the sensors blink softly in the sunlight, and felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Later that afternoon, I added a few subtle touches, solar lights near the corners, a few stepping stones repositioned, and a decorative sign that read, "Please enjoy the view from the path." It was polite, simple, and clear enough for anyone paying attention. When I finally went back inside, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The setup wasn't just about keeping my lawn neat, it was about keeping my mornings peaceful again. That evening, I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the sunset paint the houses in gold and orange. For the first time, I wasn't tense waiting to see if someone would cut across the grass. I had nothing to say, nothing to argue about, because the lawn could now speak for itself. As I leaned back, I thought about how funny life can be. A few days ago, I'd been frustrated about a simple shortcut, and now here I was, laughing at the idea that technology might solve what words couldn't. Sometimes the best solutions don't involve confrontation at all, just a little creativity. Right before heading inside, I took one last walk across the yard to double-check everything. The sensors blinked, silent and ready. I could almost imagine the next morning, Karen walking her usual route, lost in thought, clipboard in hand. She'd take that same confident step onto my grass, and in less than a second, my sprinklers would greet her like a polite wave from the garden. Nothing harmful, just a little splash of reality. I chuckled quietly. Let's see how observant you really are, Karen, I whispered to myself. The night air was cool as I locked the door and turned off the porch light. The sprinklers were armed, the plan was perfect, and my curiosity was growing by the minute. Tomorrow would be interesting, very interesting. As I drifted off to sleep, the image of Karen's surprised face replayed in my mind, not in a mean-spirited way, but like a gentle joke between the universe and me. Sometimes the simplest inventions made the best teachers. And tomorrow, my lawn was about to give its first lesson. The next morning felt brighter than usual. The air had that crisp, early warmth that comes just before summer takes hold. I brewed my coffee, opened the curtains, and smiled at my freshly watered lawn. The sprinklers were off now, silent and still, waiting like patient sentinels. I couldn't help feeling a little giddy, not in a mean way, but like a kid who knows a harmless prank is about to play out. I had no guarantee that Karen would take her usual route today, but if she did, she was in for a small surprise. Around 8:30, I saw her. She appeared at the end of the street, clipboard in hand, walking with her usual air of confidence. Her steps were brisk, purposeful, the kind of walk that said she was on a mission. She stopped every few houses, making notes or taking photos, her sunglasses reflecting the sunlight like tiny mirrors. I leaned slightly against the window frame, pretending to be busy stirring my coffee but keeping my eyes fixed on her. She was getting closer, one house away, then half a house. I held my breath. And there it was. Without hesitation, she stepped off the sidewalk and began her usual diagonal path across my lawn. Her heel pressed into the grass, followed by the click of her other shoe. 2 steps in and... whoosh! A crisp burst of water sprayed out of the hidden nozzle near the flower bed. It wasn't aggressive, just a quick, playful stream that arced perfectly across her path. She froze mid-step, eyes wide behind her sunglasses. For a moment, she looked completely confused, like she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Then she took another step forward, and the second sensor activated. Whoosh! Another spray, this one catching her right across the shoulder. She gasped, raising her clipboard like a tiny shield, which of course did nothing. A few droplets caught the edge of her hair and glistened in the sun. I nearly spilled my coffee, trying not to laugh. Karen spun in a slow circle, trying to figure out where the water was coming from. She looked down at the sprinklers, then at the house, then back at the sprinklers again. Her expression was priceless, a mix of surprise, annoyance, and disbelief. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, taking a quick step backward. But as soon as her foot touched the next section of grass, the third sprinkler fired. Whoosh! This one hit perfectly, a light mist across her legs and shoes. She squealed, half laughing, half grumbling, and dashed toward the sidewalk. When she finally made it back to dry ground, she stood there for a moment, clutching her clipboard and blinking through water droplets on her sunglasses. I set my coffee cup down and stepped outside, doing my best to look concerned. "Morning, Karen," I called cheerfully. "Everything okay?" She forced a polite smile, water dripping down the front of her blazer. "Oh, good morning. I think your sprinklers might have a bit of a mind of their own." "Oh, those," I said, glancing at the still-ticking nozzles. "Their motion activated, keeps the lawn healthy and, discourages foot traffic." She nodded quickly, wiping at her sleeve. "Ah, yes, of course. Well, they certainly work." "Glad to hear it," I said with a friendly smile. "They're sensitive, though, probably best to stick to the sidewalk from now on." Her laugh was tight, controlled. "Right, yes, absolutely." She turned to leave, but not before glancing back at the sprinklers one more time. I could almost see her calculating whether I'd done it on purpose or if it was just an unlucky accident. I decided to keep that mystery alive. After she left, I stood there for a moment, still smiling. The sprinklers had gone quiet again, the lawn gleaming softly in the sunlight. It looked peaceful, completely unaware of the small drama that had just unfolded. I went back inside, still chuckling under my breath. I hadn't meant to make a scene, but I couldn't deny how satisfying it felt to finally see my lawn defend itself. It wasn't revenge. It was balance, nature's version of a polite, no trespassing sign. Later that day, I checked the motion camera I'd installed near the porch. Sure enough, it had captured everything in perfect clarity, the approach, the surprise, and the retreat. I watched the short clip twice, laughing quietly. I decided to keep it to myself, though. This wasn't something to brag about, just a funny, private moment between me, my lawn, and karma. By evening, word had already begun to ripple through the neighborhood. I overheard two neighbors chatting across the street. "Did you hear? Someone's sprinklers soaked Karen this morning." "No way." "Oh yes, she was not happy." I smiled into my cup of tea and didn't say a word. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sprinklers glisten under the setting sun, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. No shouting, no confrontation, no drama. Just a clever, peaceful reminder that even the most determined shortcut sometimes needs a gentle detour. And tomorrow, I thought, she'd probably stick to the sidewalk. The following morning, I could feel something different in the air. It wasn't the weather, it was the energy on the street. The neighborhood was unusually lively for a weekday. 2 houses down, a couple of neighbors were standing near the sidewalk, talking in low voices, occasionally glancing toward my yard. I didn't have to guess what they were discussing. By now, the sprinkler incident had clearly made its way into the local conversation stream. News travels fast in a quiet neighborhood, faster than any gossip site, powered entirely by morning walks and shared coffee chats. And apparently the image of Karen, our proud HOA president, being politely misted by a set of motion sprinklers was the kind of story people couldn't resist retelling. I stood at my window, pretending to adjust the blinds while sipping my coffee. A small part of me felt guilty. Karen didn't deserve to be embarrassed. She just needed a gentle reminder to respect boundaries. Still, I couldn't help smiling at how fate had handled it so perfectly. I stepped outside to water the flower pots, and sure enough, Mrs. appeared again, waving cheerfully. "Morning," she called. "Your new sprinklers work really well, don't they?" I bit back a laugh. "They do seem to be effective," I said innocently. "Caught me by surprise the first time, too." "Oh, I can imagine," she said, her tone full of amusement. "Poor Karen looked like she'd walked through a summer rainstorm yesterday. But don't worry, everyone says it was just an accident." I smiled, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. Accidents happen. After she left, I crouched down near the garden bed and checked the sprinklers again, not because they needed it, but because I wanted to make sure everything still looked perfectly normal. The last thing I needed was for anyone to think it was intentional. Everything was discreet, tidy, and quietly doing its job. Later that afternoon, I took a walk around the block. As I passed different houses, I noticed more sprinklers being set up, not motion-activated ones, but still new systems. It made me laugh quietly. Apparently, my little idea had started a trend. Maybe next month's HOA newsletter would feature the benefits of smart watering. Halfway through my walk, I ran into Daniel again, the neighbor with the friendly dog. He grinned when he saw me. "Hey, sprinkler superstar," he said. "You really started something around here." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Come on," he said, chuckling. "Karen getting caught in the splash zone, that's already neighborhood legend. People are still laughing about it in a good way." I couldn't help laughing too. Well, that's one way to get noticed. "She needed a little humbling," Daniel said lightly. "You didn't do anything wrong, it's your yard." I nodded, grateful for his words. It was nice to know others saw it the same way. I wasn't trying to make anyone look bad, I just wanted peace, and maybe now I had it. That evening, I checked my email and found a message from the HOA titled "Friendly Reminders." I clicked it open, half expecting some kind of scolding, but instead, it was a cheerful note from Karen herself. "Dear residents, we'd like to remind everyone to be mindful of property lines and to use designated walkways whenever possible. Let's keep our neighborhood safe and beautiful. Sincerely, Karen, HOA President." I smiled as I read it. No tension, no finger-pointing, just a polite, generalized reminder. Exactly the kind of message I could appreciate. I had to give her credit, she handled it gracefully. I spent the rest of the evening trimming a few bushes and enjoying the sight of my yard glowing under the golden sunset. The sprinklers came on at their usual time, creating arcs of water that sparkled in the fading light. Everything felt calm again. Just as I was putting my tools away, I noticed Karen walking past on the sidewalk. She waved. "Lovely lawn," she said, smiling genuinely this time. "Thank you," I replied, waving back. "And thank you for the reminder email. I think it'll help everyone." She nodded. "Yes, I think so too. It's all about clear communication, right?" "Right," I said with a grin, "and maybe a little water." She laughed softly, shaking her head as she walked away. After she was gone, I stood there for a moment, feeling satisfied. It was strange how such a small thing, a few sprinklers, had turned the entire situation around. No arguments, no tension, no angry emails, just a little humor and a lot of water. That night, I sat on my porch with a cool drink, listening to the quiet hum of crickets. The neighborhood felt different now, lighter, more relaxed. Maybe everyone needed that small, funny story to break the routine. I looked out at the lawn, perfectly even and gently shimmering in the moonlight, and thought, sometimes the best lessons don't come from rules. They come from a little splash of perspective. A week passed after the sprinkler incident, and everything in the neighborhood seemed to settle into a calm rhythm again. The mornings were peaceful, the lawn looked great, and even Karen had been surprisingly polite since our last encounter. I figured the matter was behind us, one of those little neighborhood stories that would fade into light-hearted memory. But one Thursday afternoon, as I was pruning the rose bushes, I heard the faint sound of heels on the pavement. I looked up, and there she was again. Karen, in her usual pastel blazer and sunglasses, holding her ever-present clipboard. Only this time her expression wasn't stern, it was thoughtful. "Afternoon, Karen," I said, trying to sound casual. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," she said, pausing at the edge of my driveway. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied, setting down my pruning shears. "What's up?" She took a small breath before speaking. "I wanted to apologize for how I handled things before, cutting across your lawn, I mean." For a moment I was speechless. I hadn't expected that. Karen adjusted her sunglasses nervously. "I didn't realize it bothered you so much. I suppose I was so focused on making everything look perfect that I forgot it wasn't my place to decide what that meant for others." I smiled slightly, softening my tone. "I appreciate that, Karen. Honestly, it wasn't about perfection. I just wanted to feel like my space mattered too." She nodded, her eyes dropping to the grass. "I understand. I was a little embarrassed the other day." "You mean by the sprinklers?" I said gently. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time since I'd known her. "Yes, I must jumped a foot in the air. My husband couldn't stop laughing when I told him." Her laughter made me laugh too. The image of her standing there mid-spray had become something between us now, no longer a point of tension, but a shared joke. "Well, at least it was just water," I said. "Could been worse." "Oh, trust me, I know," she said, chuckling. Then her tone grew more thoughtful. "You know, this whole thing made me realize something. The HOA sometimes forgets that people aren't just properties. We get so caught up in rules and appearances that we lose sight of the simple stuff, like respect." That surprised me. Karen was known for quoting HOA bylaws like poetry. Hearing her speak like that was unexpected but refreshing. "I think that's a great realization," I said. "We all just want to enjoy our homes in our own way." She smiled. "Exactly. And I wanted to tell you personally, your lawn really is lovely. The flowers along the edge, those are hydrangeas, right?" "They are," I said, brightening. "Just planted them this season." "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "I think I might try some in my yard. I'm terrible with flowers, though. I can't even keep a fern alive." We both laughed again. For the first time, it felt like we were actually neighbors, not opponents. Then she added, "I was wondering, would you mind helping me plan something for the neighborhood? A little get-together, maybe. Something fun, relaxed, no clipboards, I promise." "Really?" I asked, surprised but intrigued. "Yes," she said. "After everything, I think we could all use something positive. Maybe a barbecue or garden day. I'd love your help. I thought for a moment, then nodded. You know what? That actually sounds nice. I'd be happy to help. Her smile widened. Great, I'll drop off a few ideas tomorrow. Oh, and I hope the sprinklers are still on duty. They might keep me from wandering off the path again. I grinned. Don't worry, they'll be gentle. After she left, I stood there for a long while, thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. A simple, harmless solution had turned a small conflict into something that might even strengthen the community. Maybe this was how real progress happened, not through rules, but through understanding. That evening I sat on the porch, watching the sunset cast warm colors over the neighborhood. I could see families walking dogs, kids riding bikes, and Karen chatting with another neighbor near her driveway, laughing. I realized something then. Every neighborhood has its challenges, its personalities, its disagreements. But sometimes all it takes to shift everything is one honest moment, or in my case, one very unexpected splash. As the porch light flicked on, I looked out at the lawn that had caused so much fuss and felt a quiet pride. It wasn't just about the grass anymore. It was about what it represented: patience, boundaries, and maybe even friendship. And as the sprinklers came to life one last time before nightfall, their soft mist sparkling in the fading light, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best surprises don't just wake people up, they bring them together. The next few days flew by faster than I expected. True to her word, Karen showed up the very next morning with a folder full of ideas for the neighborhood get-together. No clipboard this time, just a folder decorated with little sunflower stickers. It was almost disarming. I've been thinking, she said, spreading the pages out on my patio table. We haven't had a proper community event in years. Maybe if we make it fun and simple, everyone will want to join. Her enthusiasm caught me off guard. I'd expected a small barbecue, maybe a lemonade table, but Karen had plans. There were sketches for decorations, schedules for games, even a proposed menu. Still, she wasn't the same rigid person who once marched across my lawn. She looked genuinely excited, even a little nervous. What do you think? She asked, glancing at me as she adjusted her glasses. I looked over the pages. Honestly, it sounds great, but maybe we can make it less formal, let people bring their own food, set up their own games. She smiled. You're right, no rules, just fun. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning together, sitting on my porch as neighbors walked by and waved. The energy felt different now, warmer, friendlier. Even Mrs. came over, curious about all the papers spread out on the table. By the end of the week, flyers had been handed out, and a cheerful banner appeared near the entrance of our street. Summer on Sycamore, neighborhood gathering this Saturday. When Saturday finally arrived, the cul-de-sac transformed into something magical. Folding tables lined the sidewalks, each one decorated with colorful tablecloths and flowers from people's gardens. Kids zipped around on scooters, someone set up a karaoke speaker, and the smell of barbecue drifted through the air. I walked out carrying a tray of grilled chicken and nearly stopped in my tracks. I hadn't seen this much life on our street in years. Karen was right in the middle of it all, helping someone hang string lights between mailboxes, laughing when one of them fell slightly crooked. She looked nothing like the strict HOA leader I'd known. She was just Karen, another neighbor enjoying the day. Hey, partner, she called when she spotted me. Your flower arrangement idea was a hit. Everyone been talking about them. I grinned. Looks like we made a pretty good team. She laughed. Who knew? As the day went on, people mingled and shared stories. Someone started a trivia game about the neighborhood's history. A few older residents told funny tales about the early days when lawns were uneven and fences mismatched. It was the kind of easy, genuine laughter that made the place feel like home again. I found myself chatting with Daniel and a few others about gardening tips, and at one point, even helping kids refill their water balloons, which I soon discovered was a terrible idea if you didn't want to end up soaked. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Karen walked over with 2 cups of lemonade. Not bad, huh? She said, handing me one. Not bad at all, I said, smiling. I think this might be the happiest I've seen this neighborhood." She looked around, her eyes soft. "You know, I used to think leading the HOA was about rules and keeping everything perfect, but today this feels better than any rule I ever wrote." I nodded. Sometimes people don't need structure, they just need connection. She smiled. "You really have a way of putting things into perspective." We both stood quietly for a while, watching kids chase each other across the lawn, my lawn, actually, but this time I didn't mind. They weren't trampling it, they were filling it with joy. And maybe I thought that's what lawns are really for, not just to look at, but to be part of life. As night fell, someone lit a few lanterns, and the warm glow spread down the street. Karen got up to make a small speech, nothing formal, just a thank you. "I know we've had our share of disagreements," she began, her voice carrying gently through the crowd. "But today reminded me what this community really means. It's not about who has the best lawn or the hedges. It's about neighbors who care, laugh, and show up for one another." Everyone clapped, and I caught her glance from across the crowd, a small nod that said more than words could. The sprinklers kicked on softly in the background, misting the air with a shimmer that caught the lantern light. People laughed as the spray drifted across the edges of the gathering. Karen laughed too. "And maybe," she added, "it's also about learning where not to walk." The laughter that followed was easy, honest, and full of warmth. That night, as the crowd slowly thinned and the stars appeared above us, I looked around and realized something beautiful. A simple conflict had grown into something real, something lasting. The neighborhood wasn't just peaceful again, it was alive. The morning after the block party, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The laughter and music had faded into memory, but a pleasant calm still lingered in the air, the kind that follows a perfect evening. The street looked almost picturesque, with leftover balloons fluttering gently in the breeze and folding chairs stacked neatly near driveways. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, smiling at the faint scent of barbecue still hanging in the air. The grass was damp from the sprinkler's early run, glistening like dew in the sunlight. For the first time in a long while, my lawn wasn't just a patch of property, it was part of something bigger. As I admired the view, Karen appeared again, walking toward me with a small box in her hands. She looked different, lighter, happier. Her usual businesslike stride was gone, replaced by an easy calm. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "Mind if I interrupt your piece?" "Not at all," I said, smiling. "I was just enjoying the quiet." She handed me the box. "A little thank you for helping make yesterday happen." Inside was a small ceramic lawn gnome holding a watering can, painted in bright colors. On the base, she'd written in neat handwriting, "For the keeper of the sprinklers." I couldn't help but laugh. "This is perfect." "I figured it would suit you," she said with a grin. "Every time I walk by, I'll remember to stay on the sidewalk." "Smart plan," I said, setting the gnome carefully near the edge of the flower bed. "He can be my new lawn guardian." We both laughed, and for a while we just stood there enjoying the morning sun. Then Karen said something that surprised me. "You know," she began, "I used to think leadership meant always being right, making sure everything looked proper and followed the rules. But yesterday showed me that real leadership is about listening." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's true for all of us, I think. Sometimes we just need a little reminder to slow down and see things from another perspective." She smiled softly, like a friendly splash of water. "Exactly," I said, chuckling. A few minutes later, Daniel walked by with his dog, waving at both of us. "Morning, team. Great party yesterday. Karen, you might start a tradition." Karen laughed. "Oh, I hope so. Maybe next time we'll do a fall festival with fewer sprinklers involved." We all shared a laugh, and Daniel continued down the sidewalk. It felt good, the easy, genuine sense of belonging that had once been missing from our street. After Karen left, I spent the rest of the morning tidying up. As I collected paper plates and stacked chairs, I thought about how much had changed. What started as a small irritation, someone cutting across my lawn, had turned into something unexpectedly meaningful. It wasn't just about boundaries anymore. It was about growth for both of us. That afternoon, I found a note slipped into my mailbox. It was from Karen. Hey, neighbor. I just wanted to thank you again for your patience and for reminding me what community really means. I hope we can keep building on this. One lawn, one laugh, and one friendly surprise at a time. Karen. I smiled as I read it. She wasn't the same person who once marched across my grass with a clipboard and a frown. She'd changed, and maybe in a small way I had too. As evening rolled in, I sat on my porch again, the ceramic gnome beside me and the soft hum of crickets in the background. The sprinklers kicked on automatically, their gentle rhythm creating arcs of mist that caught the last rays of the sun. It was peaceful, beautiful, and exactly what I'd always wanted. Across the street, Karen was planting flowers along her walkway, hydrangeas, just like the ones in my garden. She waved when she noticed me watching. Hope they turn out half as nice as yours, she called. They will, I replied. You just have to give them time and water. She laughed, and for a moment, it felt like everything had come full circle. The neighborhood that once felt tense now felt alive again. We'd gone from silent nods to friendly waves, from clipped conversations to shared laughter, and all because of a few sprinklers and a small act of patience. As the sky deepened to twilight, I took one last look at my lawn, neat, green, and peaceful, and thought about how something so simple could teach such a lasting lesson. Sometimes it isn't grand gestures that change people. It's the small moments, a kind word, a shared laugh, or even a harmless splash, that remind us we're all just trying to do our best. And as I headed inside, I looked back at the little gnome standing watch by the flower bed and smiled. Maybe next time, I'd add another one, a second guardian, not to protect the lawn, but to remind me how a little kindness can grow into something far more beautiful than any garden. Because in the end, the best part about this neighborhood wasn't the grass, or the rules, or even the sprinklers. It was the people who finally learned to see each other and laugh together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.